My parents chose my sister's €73,000 wedding over the surgery that could have saved my life. You won't believe what happened when they came begging for help, and how I finally got my revenge. Everything kicked off about 3 years back, when I was 29, and I found out I had a rare heart issue called obstructive cardiomyopathy. In simple terms, the walls of my heart were thickening too much, and if I didn't get surgery soon, it was going to kill me. The cardiologist made it painfully clear this wasn't something I could ignore for a few months or push down the road. He said I had maybe a month and a half to get it done, or there was a real chance I could just collapse from cardiac arrest out of nowhere. I was sitting in his office, trying to hold it together while he explained that they'd have to cut out part of my heart muscle to save my life. The operation was booked for November 3rd, and even with insurance, it was still going to run me close to €37,000. Apparently, this kind of surgery falls into a weird gray area when it comes to coverage. I had to cough up a giant deductible, plus a pile of copays and other fees I didn't even understand. All I knew was, I didn't have that kind of money lying around. Seriously, who does when you're 29 and working full-time as a freelance illustrator, just scraping by with rent, student loans, and whatever's left for groceries? So I did what felt like my only option. I picked up the phone and called my parents. I walked them through everything, the diagnosis, the timeline, the cost, and asked if they could help. It was literally a matter of life or death. My mom broke down crying almost immediately, and then my dad got on and said, "Of course we'll help. Don't worry, we'll find a way." I remember feeling this massive wave of relief. I thought, all right, my parents have my back. I'm not going to die because I can't afford surgery. Then, 2 days later, my sister Danielle rings me up, all giddy, telling me she just got engaged to her boyfriend Lucas. I've met the guy maybe a handful of times, nice enough, I guess, but we're not exactly close. She starts going on about how they're planning to tie the knot in January, in Santorini of all places, because that's where they took their first vacation together and she wants a romantic island wedding. It's always been her dream, she says. I tell her congrats and all, but meanwhile, I've got this major heart surgery coming up in just over a month. Then she casually drops that the wedding's going to cost somewhere around €55,000, and she's expecting our parents to cover most of it. Apparently, they did the same for our older brother's wedding 3 years ago, and she doesn't want anything less than what he had. I start getting this knot in my gut, but I tell myself it's fine, our folks are decent with money. They've both been in education for decades. Not big earners, but steady ones. They own their home outright and never seemed strapped for cash. The next week, I head over to their place for dinner like I usually do. I bring up the surgery again, the hospital's asking for a deposit, and they want to confirm how the bill's going to be handled. That's when my dad gets this weird look on his face, and my mom suddenly won't even look at me. Then dad says they need to talk to me about something. And I just know, it's bad. He starts explaining how Danielle's wedding is a massive expense, and they've already locked in the venue, catering, photographer, the whole deal, and a bunch of it's non-refundable. Since the wedding's overseas, they also have to cover flights and hotel stays for our grandparents, our aunt and uncle, people who couldn't pay their way. All in, they're already on the hook for about €46,000. I'm sitting there doing the math and thinking, so you've got nearly $50K to throw at a wedding, but you can't help me with $37K for heart surgery? Dad says it's not that simple. They've already made commitments, and a bunch of people are counting on them. And Danielle, despite only just getting engaged, has apparently been planning this wedding for years. She's had Pinterest boards since she was a teenager. Then mom finally speaks and says maybe I can postpone the surgery until after the wedding, and then they can help. I just stared at her. Did she not hear the cardiologist? Postponing 3 months could literally kill me. I said as much, and she goes, well, maybe the doctor's being a bit dramatic. Heart stuff runs in families, and your grandfather lived with heart problems for years before he finally got treatment. Yeah, and he died from a heart attack at 61, I reminded her. She went quiet. Then dad chimed in again, maybe he could try getting a loan, or see if the hospital could set up a payment plan. At that point, I was boiling. Why was I the one expected to go into debt just to stay alive, while they were willingly blowing tens of thousands on a one-day event? So I said exactly that. And that's when Danielle, who apparently had been eavesdropping from the kitchen, came storming in. She starts yelling that I'm trying to ruin her big day, that I've always been jealous of her, and now I'm using my sob story to manipulate our parents. I snapped. I told her this wasn't some made-up illness. I'm not faking a heart condition. I'm not trying to steal anyone's thunder. I just might not make it to Christmas if I don't have this surgery. She shouted that I was being over the top, that loads of people have heart problems and live perfectly normal lives, that I didn't need surgery right now, and I was only trying to make her wedding all about me, like I always do. My parents just sat there, silent, while their daughters screamed at each other, one fighting to stay alive, the other fighting for her perfect wedding. Eventually, Dad raised his hand and told us both to settle down. Then he said they've made their decision. They were going to fund the wedding. They promised Danielle years ago and couldn't back out now, but they'd try to help me out after the wedding, if I could just wait. I walked out without saying a word. I was stunned. Later that night, I called my brother Nathan and told him everything. He said he'd do what he could, but he'd just bought a house, and his wife was expecting. They didn't have €37,000 lying around either. He could maybe scrape together €4,500. I was grateful, but it wasn't enough. Time was ticking. So, I ended up maxing out every credit card I had and taking out emergency loans, basically torching my financial future just to stay alive. The surgery went ahead as scheduled on November 3rd, and thankfully, everything went smoothly. The surgeon said I was out of danger for now, but I'd need to get regular checkups for the rest of my life, and there's a good chance I might need another operation down the line. But at least for the time being, I made it through. I'm alive. And honestly, that wouldn't have been the case if I'd waited around for Danielle's beachfront wedding. What stings is, my parents didn't even show up at the hospital that day. They were tied up with wedding stuff. Danielle had some kind of last-minute panic, something about the table settings or the band, and my parents drove 3 hours to meet with her wedding planner. All I got from my mom was a quick good luck text. That was it. Nathan came, though. He sat with me before they wheeled me into the OR. And my best friend from college, Emily, stayed with me too. That meant a lot. It really did. But it still cut deep that my own parents didn't think it was important enough to be there while I was having my chest cut open to stay alive. Yet they had all the time in the world for flower arrangements. Recovery was brutal. I couldn't work for about 6 weeks. My income dried up, and I fell behind on rent, missed 2 months straight. I had to crash on the couch at my old college roommate's apartment for a while just to avoid sleeping in my car. Meanwhile, my credit cards were completely maxed, and collection agencies started blowing up my phone. My life felt like it was coming apart at the seams, but I was breathing, so that had to count for something. Then December rolled around, and Danielle's wedding finally happened. From what I heard, it was exactly what she dreamed of, a breathtaking ceremony on a cliffside in Greece, custom everything, and a big dramatic sunset backdrop. My parents were gushing on Facebook with post after post, our beautiful daughter's big day, such a magical moment, proud parents. You'd think she won a Nobel Prize. I didn't go. I was still recovering, sure, but truthfully, I couldn't stomach the idea of pretending I was okay. I wasn't. I was angry. I was hurt. And I wasn't ready to fake smiles for photos like nothing had happened. But here's where things start to spiral, and where I really need to explain why I did what I did yesterday. About 6 months after the wedding, I got a call from my dad. His voice was off, tense, strained. For a second, I thought maybe they were going to apologize or offer to help with my bills. Nope. I went over to their place, and they sat me down. Said they were in serious trouble financially, like, might lose their home kind of trouble. Turns out the wedding didn't just cost €46,000 like they said before. They ended up blowing almost €73,000, because Danielle kept changing her mind, upgrading things, and inviting more people. They paid for everyone's flights, hotel stays, everything. And when they ran out of cash, they took out a loan against their house. Now they couldn't keep up with the payments, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. My dad looked at me and asked if I could help. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was just so ridiculous. He got upset and said, "This isn't a joke. We could lose everything." I told him, "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before choosing a wedding over your daughter's survival." My mom burst into tears and said I was being heartless. But I wasn't. I was being honest. I reminded them that they made a choice, and it wasn't me. They picked Danielle's party over my surgery. Now they had to live with that. I told them I wasn't going to swoop in and clean up a mess they made while I was left to fight for my life with no support. Dad tried to justify it, said they didn't think it was that urgent, that they assumed I'd be fine and didn't realize how serious it was. I asked him, what part of you could drop dead any day did you not understand? He didn't have an answer. About a year later, they lost the house. They moved into a cramped apartment across town. My dad picked up a second job delivering groceries, and my mom started cleaning vacation rentals on weekends. Meanwhile, Danielle and Lucas relocated to another state for his job and more or less ghosted the whole family drama they helped cause. And yeah, part of me felt bad for my parents. They're not young anymore, and I know this has been hell for them. But another part of me, the bigger part? I felt like they were just sleeping in the bed they made. I was still drowning in medical debt, still living week to week. Even if I wanted to help, I wasn't in any position to do it. Which brings us to yesterday. My mom shows up out of the blue at my door. She's crying, shaking, and begging me to help. Says they're about to be evicted, they have no place to go, and they're out of options. She's apologizing about the surgery, saying they were wrong, they messed up, they know I must hate them, but please, they need a place to stay. Just for a little while. I'm standing there, staring at my 62-year-old mother, this woman who raised me, who I still love, and I'm torn in two. Part of me wanted to take her inside, but the other part was remembering how alone and terrified I felt, lying in that hospital bed while she was off choosing flower arrangements for someone else's big day. So I told her I couldn't help. Then I shut the door. I heard her crying out in the hallway. And yeah, it felt awful, but it also felt justified, because I wasn't the one who failed our family. I just stopped trying to fix what they broke. Later, Nathan called me, said Mom had called him in tears. He told me I should help, that they're still our parents, that they're old and scared, and people make mistakes. He said I should be the bigger person. I told him, if you're that concerned, let them move in with you and your wife. Let's see how that plays out. He said that wasn't fair, his wife's expecting, and they don't have the space. And I said, well, my situation wasn't fair either. I needed emergency heart surgery, and they picked Danielle's wedding instead. Life's full of hard choices, right? Then this morning, out of nowhere, Danielle calls me, first time in almost 2 years, and she's yelling, screaming at me for turning my back on our parents, for being cold and selfish, for refusing to grow up and let go of the past. I told Danielle that if she was so concerned about Mom and Dad, then she could step up and send them money. She shot back, saying it wasn't her responsibility, that they weren't her problem. So I said, well, they're not mine either. She hung up after that, but not before throwing in one last jab, that I'm a horrible person and I'd regret this someday. I don't know, maybe I will. I'm just caught in this mess of emotions, confused, upset, frustrated. I feel guilty sometimes, but I also feel like I'm justified. The line between being a decent person and setting healthy boundaries has gotten so blurry. And the truth is, I don't know if I'm handling this the right way or if I really am being the bad daughter everyone says I am. It's hard because everyone in my family has something to say, but their advice always seems to come with strings attached. Their own guilt, their own expectations, their own need for the family to look okay from the outside. What people don't get is, I'm not sitting on a pile of cash. I'm still digging myself out of the debt I went into just to stay alive. I live in a cramped studio in the middle of Newark. I freelance to pay the bills, which means some months are good and others, not so much. I don't have thousands of dollars lying around to hand over. And honestly, even if I did, I'm not sure I'd want to give it to the same people who had the means to help me when I was dying, and chose a wedding instead. Maybe that makes me petty, maybe it makes me bitter, or maybe it just makes me human. I think I deserve to be angry. I think my parents should feel what it's like to deal with the fallout of a decision, just like I had to when I was staring down the possibility of dying because they wouldn't lift a finger. So yeah, I'm asking myself if I'm wrong for refusing to rescue the same people who left me to fend for myself when I was fighting for my life. First update. So, a lot's happened since I first shared all of this, and honestly, it's been overwhelming. The outpouring of support and messages? I didn't expect it, and I really appreciate it. That said, not everyone has been supportive. After I posted, my phone basically exploded. Apparently, my mom had gone and called half the extended family, telling them I was refusing to help, and they were about to be homeless, and it was all my fault. Suddenly, I had uncles, aunts, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years texting and calling, telling me that family sticks together, and I needed to do the right thing, that I was being selfish. But here's what really floored me, what really made everything snap into focus. My cousin Marissa, someone I've always been close with, reached out. She said she'd heard what was going on, but wanted to hear my side. So, I told her everything, start to finish. There was a long silence on the line. Then she said, wait, I thought your parents helped pay for your surgery? I was confused. I asked her what she meant. She told me that at Danielle's wedding, my parents were going around telling everyone how much the surgery had cost, how hard it was on them financially, but how they were happy to sacrifice because that's what parents do. They were painting themselves as these devoted, selfless people who helped save their daughter's life, and the whole room had practically clapped for them. Meanwhile, I was maxing out credit cards, taking out personal loans, and sleeping on a friend's couch just to stay afloat. They were basking in sympathy and praise for something they didn't even do. I felt physically sick hearing that. They knew exactly what they had done. They knew they'd abandoned me when I needed them most. And instead of owning it, they spun a whole story to make themselves look good while I was just trying to survive. I called Nathan and told him what Marissa had said. He went quiet for a bit, then said he vaguely remembered our mom saying something about helping me with the costs at the wedding. But he didn't really think twice about it. He'd been preoccupied with his wife's pregnancy and hadn't questioned it. He just assumed they were telling the truth. That's when it really hit me. Not only did my parents choose Danielle's destination wedding over my surgery, they lied about it to everyone. They played the part of heroic parents while I was left behind in the real world, struggling to breathe, literally and financially. That lie? That performance? It made me angrier than anything else. It cemented my decision. I wasn't wrong to say no. But then, yesterday happened. I was at a cafe downtown, meeting with a potential client and going over some branding concepts. We were mid-conversation when I saw someone sobbing near the register, a woman pointing toward me. It was my mother. She'd walked in off the street, crying, asking the barista if she knew who I was, and made a whole scene. My client looked totally thrown. I had to excuse myself, tell them I had a personal emergency, and reschedule. I went over to where my mom was sitting, alone at a corner table. She looked rough, exhausted, desperate. She begged me for just 5 minutes. So, I agreed. We stepped outside. She immediately started apologizing, saying they made a huge mistake, that she knows how badly they hurt me, that they were wrong about the surgery, that they were scared, that she's sorry, that they need help, that they'd pay me back, somehow, as soon as they could get back on their feet. I asked her point blank, "Did you or did you not tell everyone at Danielle's wedding that you helped pay for my surgery?" She hesitated, then that look came over her face, that guilty, deer-in-the-headlights look of someone caught in a lie. She said she was ashamed that they couldn't help me and didn't want people to think they were bad parents. So, she just let people assume they'd paid, and it got out of control. But that didn't match what Marissa said. According to her, they actively told people they had covered the costs. They didn't just let it get out of hand. They fed that story. I called her on it. She broke down even harder. She said she was humiliated, that she made terrible choices, that she just wants her family back. And yeah, part of me wanted to reach out and comfort her. She looked so small and afraid. But the other part of me? The one that remembers what it was like being alone in that hospital room, fighting off panic attacks and hospital bills? That part was screaming, "Don't you dare let this happen again." So I told her I needed time to think. She wiped her eyes and said, "We don't have time. The eviction's next week." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "That's not my emergency." That's when her face changed. She stood straighter and said, "You're just like your father, stubborn, cold, unforgiving." And then she turned and walked away. That night, Danielle called again. This time, when Danielle called, she wasn't yelling, she was crying. She said she'd just talked to Mom and had finally learned the truth about the lies told at the wedding. She said it made her feel sick. She told me she wanted to help our parents, but things weren't great for her either. Barry had lost his job a few months ago, and they were living in his parents' basement out in Kentucky. They didn't have anything to spare. For a second, I felt bad for her. She sounded genuine for once, like the situation had finally broken through whatever denial she'd been living in. But then she said something that snapped me right back. She said maybe if I helped Mom and Dad now, she could pay me back later, once Barry was working again and they were back on their feet. And that's when it hit me. Even now, she was still trying to hand the responsibility to me, like it was my job to fix the fallout, while she sat it out and made vague promises. So I told her flat out, she got her fairy tale wedding. Now she needed to step up and support the same parents who wrecked their finances to give it to her. It wasn't my job to clean up a mess caused by her beachside ceremony. She got quiet. Then she said she never asked them to spend that kind of money. They made those decisions on their own. And I said, exactly. Just like they made the decision to fund your wedding instead of my surgery. So now you get to carry the weight of being the favored child. And I hung up. I know some people are going to think that was too much, too cold, too harsh. But I'm just done. I'm done being the one who's supposed to be strong, who's supposed to forgive, who's expected to fix what everyone else broke, all while I'm still trying to recover from what they did to me. I'm still paying for their choices, emotionally, financially, psychologically. My credit is still bruised from the medical debt. I'm still in therapy, working through the trauma of almost dying and being abandoned when I needed support the most. And now I'm supposed to just erase all that? Pretend it never happened? Because now they're desperate? No, I'm standing by my decision. If that makes me the villain in their version of this story, then so be it. At least I'm not the one enabling the same painful patterns that nearly destroyed me. Final update. This will probably be the last time I talk about any of this, because honestly, I'm exhausted, but I wanted to share how it all played out. And also say thank you to every single person who messaged, commented, or reached out with kindness. Your support made me feel sane during a time when my whole family was trying to make me feel like I was the problem. My parents ended up being evicted. They're staying with my dad's brother, Uncle Ron, and his wife, in the basement of their home. According to Nathan, it's a tense situation. Aunt Lydia never liked my parents much, and now that they're living under her roof, she's not exactly hiding her feelings. She's made it clear, this arrangement is temporary, and they need to find another place ASAP. Danielle called me one last time. She was furious, told me it's my fault that our parents are basically homeless, living in a basement like squatters, and that I'm a horrible person for not preventing it, even though I could have. I told her, I didn't ask them to spend 73,000 euros on your wedding. I didn't force them to remortgage their house or rack up debt they couldn't handle. They made their decisions, and now they're dealing with the consequences. She said I was heartless, that I'd regret this when they die, and I'd have to live with the guilt of not helping when they needed me most. So I told her, they weren't there when I needed them most, and I almost died. If I could figure out how to survive on my own, they can too. That's when she crossed a line. She told me my surgery wasn't even that serious, that people live with heart issues all the time, and I was just being dramatic. And right there, that was it. That was all the proof I needed that she still didn't get it. She probably never will. I told her, if pretending your wedding was more important than my life helps you sleep at night, go ahead, but don't rewrite the past. You don't get to rewrite history to feel better about the decisions you made. Then I blocked her number. I'm done having the same fight over and over. Nathan's been trying to stay out of the crossfire, but he did call me recently. He said our parents are both working now. Dad's delivering for a courier service, Mom's taking cleaning jobs wherever she can, and they're trying to scrape together enough for a new apartment. He said they asked him to ask me, one last time, if I'd help with the deposit. Not ongoing support, just enough to get them into a place of their own. I told him my answer hasn't changed. If he wants to help, he's free to. But I'm not going to keep being asked to sacrifice for people who already proved I wasn't a priority. Nathan said he understood, but he still thought I should forgive them, that holding on to the anger was hurting me, not them, that they were sorry, that they'd learned. And I said, some lessons are expensive. This one's on them. They should have done the math before putting me last. He didn't push after that, but I could tell he thinks I'm being rigid. Maybe I am, or maybe I'm finally being consistent. I've spent years bending, forgiving, waiting for them to act like parents again, and now that I've stopped, I actually feel lighter. Setting these boundaries was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most important. I'm not stuck in the cycle of guilt anymore. I don't second-guess myself every time I say no. I'm healing. My therapist's been helping me process all of this, and she told me what I experienced was abandonment. It's okay to protect myself, even if they're family, even if they're sorry now. For those asking, my health's good. My heart is stable. I get checked every 6 months, and so far, everything looks great. As long as I stay on top of it, I should be able to live a normal life. The debt's nearly gone. My credit score's climbing again. My freelance work is more consistent now, and I've started saving. I'm proud of myself, because I got through something terrifying, alone, and I made it. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I'd waited for that surgery, if I'd listened when they told me to delay it until after Danielle's wedding. The doctors were clear, I wouldn't have made it. So no, I don't feel guilty for saying no now. When people say, but they didn't know how serious it was, I remind them, the cardiologist explained it plainly. They chose to ignore it, because it didn't fit into their plans. That's not something I can forget. Not now, not ever. If you think I'm being too harsh, maybe you've never had to save your own life while the people who raised you picked party planning over showing up. I'm not saying I'll never speak to my parents again, but right now, I need space, and they need to understand that their choices had consequences, ones they can't cry their way out of. Danielle can keep living in Ohio, pretending her wedding didn't wreck everything. My parents can keep grinding at those second jobs, rebuilding what they threw away. And me? I'm going to keep living, keep taking care of myself, the way I had to when they didn't. Thank you to everyone who reached out, supported me, and reminded me I wasn't crazy for standing my ground. You helped me feel seen. Sometimes, putting yourself first isn't selfish, it's survival. So this is my last update. I'm letting go of the drama. I've got a life to live, and I'm not wasting another second on people who only show up when it's convenient. I deserve better, and so does anyone who's ever been deceived, discarded, or abandoned by the people who were supposed to love them the most.